Welcome to the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring intimate conversations with emerging and established musicians, recorded at the Gaslight Studios in St. Louis. And now your host, Aaron Perlin. He's a music lifer from Trinity, North Carolina, who's worked in the music scene in New York City since the 1990s. He's also a talented singer-songwriter who's got a very strong debut record out. He is Gregory Dwane, and he is my guest this episode of the Loadout Music Podcast. Gregory, it's great to finally meet you in person, I guess, as much in person as this is.
Totally. Great to meet you too. Thanks for thinking of me and having me on.
Yeah, it's funny because, you and I kind of are connected musically to a degree through Instagram. And, I've followed you as you've kind of come out of the shadows of your production roles that you've had for many, many years. And, before that, you were playing in punk bands and things like that, which must be kind of an interesting pivot for you. But, I'd like to kind of start off with where you came from, from basically furniture making country in North Carolina, where I've actually spent quite a bit of time, ironically.
Really?
Yeah, I have. So, you grew up in North Carolina in the small town kind of south of Greensboro. What was it that at some point said to you, hey, I need to move to New York and kind of pursue music to some semblance?
Oh man, I mean, that instinct for me really was there around 12 years old. Like I had gotten into music. I had gotten into rap, at 12. I'm a little bit older, so at that time it was like Run DMC and
that's the rap that I grew up on. So
yeah, it's like it's Nucleus and I don't know, you name it. And so I was really into rap, and I got into my first instruments were a couple of turntables from Radio Shack and a mixer. They weren't even the right kind of turntable. They were belt drive, which is not, you're not supposed to. I had no idea what I was doing. But I'd watched this movie called Beat Street, and
Beat Street, the king of the beat. You could see them coming from across the street.
I watched this movie, and it was set in New York, and it looked amazing, and that kind of like set the seed that there was, New York was the place for things, and my life would go through many different shades, but it kind of set the ground. Like I knew music was going to be a thing. And even then, like this, I tell this story, but even then, like I was mixing, Run DMC instrumentals, and the only acapella I could find was a 45 I had of Take This Job and Shove It. And that line was the only line that was, acapella, take this job and shove it. And so I was like mixing that and Run DMC when I was, 12, 13 at the time, around there. So, just all kinds of music were in my life at that point.
Was your household a musical household? Like, did you grow up singing in church like a lot of folks do?
Not really, no. My house was pretty dry. Like my mom was very religious. There was a lot of gospel or, gospel radio, but not necessarily musical. My dad had a guitar and could play like a couple of Johnny Cash songs. But, I was just drawn to it. I'm a kid of, MTV was new. There was just a lot of great influence and visual that came in. And then pretty soon after that, we discovered skateboards in my little town. This is like in the woods,
Yeah.
It's pretty rural, but we're seeing these images on TV. We're watching these movies, and then we're kind of acting it out. And so it was pretty quick that it went from, breakdancing to skateboarding, which then led to punk rock. And then just getting into all the punk bands that were around. And then I had a mohawk pretty quick, and my friends who lived in Greensboro needed a drummer, and I looked the part. So they literally brought me a drum set and taught me 2 drum beats. I'm 15 at this time, maybe 14, 15 in that area. They taught me 2 drum beats, and I became a drummer, like in these punk. Our first band was called Dead Drunk. And in many ways, that took it to the next level. It was like, oh, this is real. This is cool. And then that turned into playing in more bands. I still hadn't even I didn't pick the guitar up till kind of late in life compared to most people, because I played drums for a bit. I bought drum machines and maybe a bass, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And
I mean, you worked as a keyboard tech for a while, didn't you?
well, yeah, that was in my 30s. I'm still 15 or 16. But I did kind of figure it out, and I taught myself, I knew music was what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I ended up teaching myself to read snare drum percussion music and got into college. Otherwise, I would have never have gotten into a college. So I got myself into North Carolina School of the Arts, just from being able to play a damn snare drum. But, and that led to meeting some interesting people. And up till that point and around that point, I had been maybe done a little bit of live sound. When the guitar player in my band was doing live sound, he had a system. And so around that time, I was doing live sound. We were doing it at this place called Fuzzy Ducks, and I would do live sound for Hootie and the Blowfish, like every night,
Yeah, because they were from South Carolina, and they played up and down the East Coast. Yeah,
a lot of people like that came through, and so I was kind of getting my head around, audio gear at the same time as playing music, and I had started. So moved forward a few years. I had dropped out of college because I really wasn't prepared, even though I could play a mean snare drum, and I was just playing music, doing some audio stuff, and then I had started an underground club. So we were having raves once a month to kind of pay the bills, and then we would have like Fugazi come through, or just amazing bands. Superchunk would play, all these, but all underground. I'm surprised we didn't all go to jail. But then that led to me kind of waking up one morning and just having this epiphany that I needed to move to New York and become an engineer, like a recording engineer.
Yeah.
From some records I was listening to at that time. And so I quickly saved some money, worked 2 jobs waiting tables, and moved to New York. Really, I knew one person who was there, and she had a friend with a room. And I got a room, and my friends drove me to New York, and there was a recording studio that was on the back of a bunch of records that I liked at the time. I was really into John Spencer Blues Explosion and Pavement and some other random bands, and they had all recorded at this one place called Waterworks Studio. And so I just found the phone number in the phone book, like you did then, and called the guy and said, I've got some money, I can work for free. I don't really know what's going on in the studio, but I want to learn. I'll be there every day. And the guy was like, come on down. And so I got a job. I was 22, 23. This is 93 maybe. I got this gig pretty quickly, and I was in the studio, day one, setting up microphones and doing the thing. And it was really, in hindsight, it was, you don't realize it when you're that young. It's just what you're doing, you're kind of like floundering through life in a weird way. But in hindsight, it was super cool. Like the things I got part of, and how I got to learn. And then, that led to just randomly meeting this girl that worked at a record store and kind of telling her what I was doing. And she's like, oh, you need to meet my friend Ray. And, I was at a club one night, and Ray was there, and she introduced me, and Ray brought me in my first paying gig at a recording studio called Shelter Island Sound. And that was ran by this producer named Steve Adabo, who like his biggest music probably that I can think of is he produced those early Suzanne Vega records, Solitude Standing, and that DNA song that's still, or the Tom's Diner, that's still huge to this day on TikTok and everywhere. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I want to take a step back real fast. Before you moved to New York, having kind of paid attention to the social views that you espouse on Instagram, you strike me as being pretty ferociously liberal. In fact, I think you even write that maybe in your bio on Instagram. How was it growing up? I'm assuming this is something that's been inside you a long time, in in Trinity, North Carolina, a rural community, and I would imagine you had very different values than a lot of the people around you. Was that the case?
To say the least. Yeah. I mean, those towns have came a long ways from when I was
Sure.
12. I don't, I think about it sometimes. I don't really know I don't know if it was the media I watched or whatever, but I was, my instincts were pretty liberal and accepting from the beginning, and some of that was just like, it goes back to breakdancing and I grew up in the church. I grew up like Pentecostal holiness, Southern Baptist, a lot of insanity, a lot of hypocrisy, like all the stuff that you soak in and you're like, something seems off about this. But it goes back to as early as breakdancing and meeting kids from the other neighborhoods, and bringing them to my house, or we at the time the church was a big thing, so we would go to the church and dance in the back, and like do our thing. And the negativity that I remember hearing and receiving from bringing kids of color around was really I'm processing this at 12 and 13, but it's remarkable, when you're a kid and you're like, wait, you're saying one thing on Sunday morning and you're doing another thing all
Yeah,
the
you're
other,
saying we should love everyone, but
and then but just maybe not them, and we don't know how that reflects on us. And that dynamic played forward into getting a little older, and then having friends that were not straight or gay, or and then having similar issues, like everyone's just frightened. I mean, I have to look at it like people are frightened and they're ignorant. That's
right.
where I'm from, and not be angry at everybody all the time. But
How was that received more directly in your household, when clearly I would imagine your views were probably outside the norm of what your parents had, and of course there's generational difference, add generational differences on top of that. But did you find kind of a similar discomfort that you found in the church, or was your mom more accepting and nurturing of you for those differences?
Man, it's things, it's just not that black and white. The truth of the matter is that I came from a pretty stressful, also talk about hypocrisy and Sunday morning and other time. Like, my father was a pretty brutal alcoholic when I was a kid, and my mom was all Jesus all the time. So there was this crazy dynamic of that. So somewhere in there, probably around 12, I kind of wrote my father off. I was like, this guy's fucked. I got nothing, it's a weird like, he's still my father. He's still paying the bills. He's still doing things, but
Was he living at home with you at the time?
he was, yeah. I mean, we had lots of drama, and there were many nights that were, that could have gone different ways. But there was a period of high stress, and then you add me coming home with a mohawk or piercing my ear. There's typical family kind of drama, and then there's kind of the next level when you add Jesus to the mix and alcohol to the mix. It's a real hotbed. So, however, wherever I found my confidence, I have no idea, but I found I knew that I wasn't. And strangely, at that time, I had, because my father was such an alcoholic, I was straight edge, if that's, the word at that moment.
Yeah.
I was like not doing drugs. I wasn't a great student, but I wasn't causing trouble. And I kind of knew, I knew I'm not a bad kid, and you're creating these situations based on, again, your, aesthetics or fear of other things. And believe me, I had many arguments with my father, like, who do you think you are? Wanting to go to New York, or wanting to be these things that, again, in hindsight, probably were ridiculous to him, because he
Yeah.
came from the woods of Tennessee and had to go in the military, and everything he had, he worked for. And the idea that you could be a musician or a painter, or it's just ridiculous. You know, he was just coming from a different place. And I try to process it through that just ignorance, you know. And
Yeah.
it's like having a kid, I have my own fears and ignorance for my 17-year-old, you know. And I
Sure.
have to remember, like, man, I just don't know.
Now, as straight edged as you might have been at that age, eventually alcohol became a problem for you, right?
Eventually, yeah. Well, that was, you know, there's this, so straight edge, and then there's a point when I'm like 21 that I realize that my father still has this weird psychological control over me, because I'm making these decisions because of his decisions, if that makes sense. And pretty much, you know, when I was 21, I remember my first beer, listening to music, and this is starting to feel like an AA meeting, but which I've been part of for 20 years. I remember those things just vividly shooting through my body. And it was a matter of weeks before I was doing LSD, PCP, ecstasy, like having a great time, you know. And part of my decision to move to New York, I was high on ecstasy. And I remember like waking up, like, you know, tingly and like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And I did it. You know, I made some great bad decisions. Doing But yeah, like I've always said, drugs are great until they're not, or they work, or alcohol, you know, it's the lubricant that allows you to meet people and do those things. Like, it's great until it's not.
That's how my wife described me until I quit drinking after, you know, 35 years of hard drinking. She was like, yeah, Aaron's great until he's not. And, you know, 3.5 years sober for me. So I can certainly understand what the necessity to put the bottle down.
Congrats.
So I know, so you're in New York. I mean, you're kind of living this music lifestyle where I'm sure you're in recording studios all the time, and you've got people drinking and smoking weed as they're recording, because, you know, having been in recording studios, that's just kind of what happens, especially, you know, at shows too. But there's a point where ultimately you pick up and move to LA, I think, to work in Alanis Morissette's band, and that's where you became a keyboard tech, right?
Yeah, so I bounced around New York for a good 10 years. I produced some records. I played. I was good at shooting myself in the foot. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I was drinking a lot. I would white knuckle it for a while. I was getting into pills. I was, weed I hated weed, but it was occasionally a thing. And pretty much it just kind of crashed. Like, I bounced and hustled as long as I could in about 10 years. And, post 9/11, 9/11 didn't help either in many ways, but it definitely exacerbated some things. And I ended up kind of crashing and burning, hitting my bottom in New York around 2001. And
you're still drinking then, you're doing a lot of drugs, kind of
doing whatever's around, having fun, but going home like something is not right, but nothing, and I had been around, my father ended up getting sober, and I had been around Al-Anon and Alateen, but nothing in my mind really told, like, it just didn't make sense that it could be alcohol was the problem, or, this alcohol was a symptom, and that there were some deeper things I needed to get to. And anyways, I hit bottom. I ended up packing up my stuff and moving back to my parents' house at 30 years old, like, what am I doing? This, like, my tail between my legs, just horrible. And it doesn't seem like a lot now, because that's just a common thing for millennials to do, but for Gen X's to home was not cool. And so I moved back home, and that, it's like that same week, a friend I grew up with blew his brains out. Like, he also was one of us. He had a problem and chose, and so all of a sudden I'm at this wake, and, but, as life has it, I had one of my earlier managers, a kid that worked there, this kid EJ, um, yeah, he had my earlier manager. Her husband was Warren Haynes,
Hmm.
uh, in Allman Brothers and Government Mule, just a sweetheart of a man. And so this kid worked for them and their record label, and I'd produced a few records for their label. And I reached out. I think I knew he was working for Alanis. And here's what happened. Before that, I had done one tour with Joan Osborne. I
Sure.
was I was working in rehearsal studios, um, and I met the guitar player for Joan Osborne, and he was like, "Man, do you want to go to Japan next week?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Happens all the time.
I had nothing better to do in my life. He's like, "This is what it pays." It was more money than I'd been paid in years. So I ended up doing that. That turned into a month on the road with them, 2 weeks in Japan. And I kind of learned the gig. And I met another roadie on that tour. And he worked with Bowie, David Bowie at the time. And also had another, it's long stories. But anyway, there was another friend that was supposed to gig that was supposed to pop up working for No Doubt. I had this option, like you could go work for No Doubt or David Bowie, and the No Doubt tour was supposed to be like a year long, and I just needed work and something to do, and the beer was free. It was a pretty easy job to do. Like I know how to show up. I'm a pretty high functioning alcoholic for the most part. I can get my thing done, and then I go destroy myself. And so those things fell apart, and No Doubt was really nice, and they ended up writing me a check because they had kind of fucked me over a little bit, but they were super cool and like wrote me this check. So I ended up moving back to my parents' house with no prospects, but I had discovered the tech world, if you will, the roadie world.
Mm.
And so I reached out to my friend EJ, who was personal assistant for Alanis, and said, "If you need anybody, hear anything, let me know." And a week later, they needed a keyboard tech, as a habit. And then so pretty quick, I was in Hollywood or North Hollywood in a rehearsal studio with these great guys in the band. The guys in the band are basically like me. They're just dudes that got the gig. They're not really rock stars. They're just cool guys. And
Was Taylor Hawkins with the band at that point?
no, this guy Blair Senta was playing drums. Taylor left pretty early in the 90s. Yeah. So Blair was there. But anyways, so I got that gig. It was super fun. Again, back to Japan, back around the world. Just, it's I hadn't really traveled that much up to that point. So kind of getting to see the world on someone else's dime, actually make money. Was super cool. And then that led me to the tour manager, production manager on that gig also was working with Jane's Addiction at that time. And so about a year into that, she pulled me to be Dave Navarro's guitar tech for a minute.
Right. You worked with both him and Macy Gray as well, right?
Macy Gray happened somewhere in there. That was a real clusterfuck. But so I ended up with Jane's Addiction, and this kind of leads me to getting sober. Was so Dave, a lot of the crew that Dave worked with were sober people.
Yeah.
A lot of the assistants and things. So I became friends with those guys, and they did what's called like being my Eskimo. They brought me in from the cold. And they saw my behavior and were like, "Hey, why don't you come to this meeting with us in Hollywood?" And it was up to that point, I knew something was wrong. I was doing my own soul searching. I was buying books. I was trying to become a Buddhist, all the things to mitigate whatever just doesn't go right in your soul, and they took me to this meeting, and it was like, I didn't get sober that night, but the message had been put in me. It was, and it's two things. One, it was aesthetic. You walk into this meeting in Hollywood, and it's just the coolest people you can imagine. People because they're rock stars. People you don't know, but they look, they're cool. It felt like a nightclub, but it also felt like people were being honest about who they were and what they'd been through. And and how much better their lives were.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the right combination that was like, oh my God, this I can do. I probably went another month, and then finally there was one last night of trying to hit on my friend's girlfriend and raiding the mini bar or whatever you do. And I woke up the next day and went to a meeting, and I just never drank again. Like 20, coming up on 20 years. I started going to meetings. I started meeting people, and and that led again. It's just these crazy doors that open. That led to me meeting some great people that I ended up in some really cool bands and met guys who would go on to open other doors for me in my life, and we're still friends to this day. It's a really powerful. It was a powerful time for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that when I gave up alcohol, I quit cold turkey one day because I kind of needed to. And what I did was I found meetings near my office and put them on my calendar in the event that I ever felt weak and felt like I needed to do that. And after about a year, I didn't go to any. And then, not that there's anything wrong with meetings, just I think everybody deals with it differently and manifests it differently. And so, I've never looked back. It's been 3.5 years. I don't crave it whatsoever, which surprised me in retrospect. But it is what it is. We all do it for different reasons, to cover up different shortcomings, and then ultimately, you manage it differently. But nobody's right, nobody's wrong.
No, it's there are different ways to get from point A to point B, and for me, I needed this. The 12 steps were the structure I needed that I still use in my daily life and business and dealing with children. Like, I just didn't have those tools.
Yeah.
I do, and I know they're there, and that worked for me. But yeah, I don't. For me, the only time I don't crave things like that in the bad times. It's like when things are really good and I'm like on vacation or something. Like, now would be really time for a Corona, or something.
Yeah, a bourbon would be great right now.
Just like it's not when things are dark. I don't even go that way. Like it's it's a strange one for me. But that the thing I crave most is cigarettes. I don't even know why. I want to, like, every once in a while it's like, I just want a cigarette, man. But
I have found pretty adequate non-alcoholic beer and even non-alcoholic wine for the actual taste of it. But it is, for me, it's like the bourbon is very difficult to replicate. And I've tried non-alcoholic spirits before, but then you have one or two non-alcoholic beers. And for me, I'd have one, and then I had six, and then I had a 12 pack. And then next thing I want more. But with you have one or two non-alcoholic beers, you're like, okay, I'm good. You move on and you're done. But it's a different sensation. I'm sure it's driven by the lack of alcohol, but it's just, not, I feel fortunate, and, I know there's support networks around me if I ever need them. And yeah. So, after working with Dave and Macy, you mentioned you joined some bands. I know you were in Mellodrone for a while. You were actually playing bass in Mellodrone. And then your friend Michael Fitzpatrick, who leads Fitz in the Tantrums, he got you into jingle writing, right? Which you did for about 15 years.
Yeah. Mike. So Mikey Fitz was not Fitz in the Tantrums when I knew him.
Yeah.
We met at an AA meeting. He was trying to put together a band, and the drummer in my band was like, "Hey, this guy plays bass." And so we ended up playing together in a band for a minute. And then he was already writing music for TV commercials at that point and was very successful.
A lot of people don't know that Barry Manilow kind of really got his start. The Dr. Pepper jingle and the McDonald's jingle. If you deserve a break today, that was all Barry Manilow in the 70s.
There's probably more people that just don't want you to know, but
oh yeah,
a lot of people put in their time because the money's good, and it doesn't take a lot of your time. So a couple years into LA, I have a kid, and I really need, I'm making money. We're signed to Sony, but I'm getting like $500 a week, which is fine when you're,
when you're single and it's just you.
And there's not a lot going on, and um, but I needed to really figure out real money. And Mikey Fitz, being the generous soul that he is, really opened some doors for me and said, call this person. And luckily, at that time, even though I didn't have any gear, I didn't really know what I was doing like I had produced records, I'd worked in studios, but I had really put in no time into, producing music on my computer, even though I'd been a Pro Tools engineer, but that was very different. Pro Tools was just a tape machine back then. So he opened some doors, and luckily I had a little cred from being in those bands because we were kind of LA famous, and you could hear us on the radio. And so that opened some, that proceeded to open the door further. And then, my mom was kind and came out, I had this new kid, I had no money, and my mom came out and co-signed a loan for me, for like $18,000 or something, it seemed like a lot of money at the time. I took half of that money and went and bought a computer and an interface and like software, and half of it was what I had to live on for the next year with this newborn. And I slowly started to figure the game out. Like I just started writing. I started, trying my best, really listening to what other people were doing. And I had to learn how to do the gig because it's a very different gig than writing songs. And it took me about 7 months. And then I booked my first 3 jobs in 1 week, whatever that thing was, like something clicked.
So what's your claim to fame? Do you have one that you're like, I did that?
I never really wrote any like jingles, it was mostly background music. I did get sued once for one, but that was pretty cool.
Getting sued is the best, isn't it?
Like, come on, it ended up getting thrown out, which was fine. But there was a lot of people suing back then. But mostly it was background music, BMW, Saturn, that old, Target, you name it.
So at what point do you start working with Amy Ray, of course, of the Indigo Girls? Because I know she's become kind of a friend and collaborator of yours, and she's involved in the new record too. She sang on 2 of the tracks. But at what point do you start working with her producing records?
So in the 90s, when I moved to New York, I answered an ad on a telephone pole for this band, looking for a guitar player. And it ended up being this band called Vitapup, which I was in early in New York. And, we thought we were going to be famous. We had Nirvana's lawyer and booking agents, and it was awesome. But the drummer in that band, Melissa York, I still work with to this day and just a lifelong friend, had left New York and started a band called the Butchies. And the Butchies, I had produced 2 records for them. Maybe I had done a record for Kaya, who was in this band Team Dresch, and Melissa had also been in Team Dresch. Amy had used the Butchies as a backing band on a record or 2.
Gotcha.
I think Dag, things like that. And so Melissa, always just a beautiful soul, kept talking me up. You should work with Greg. You should work with Greg. And so Amy finally reached out, and we ended up doing 2 records. I had moved back. I had left LA and moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, with my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife at the time, and our child. And so I had a little studio there, and we made 1 record at Echo Mountain in Nashville and 1 at my warehouse studio in Greensboro. And that's how I got hooked up with Amy. We did those records, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And then I toured. I was her bass player in the band for a bit, and I did.
Which must have been a pretty amazing. I mean, the fandom that Amy and the Indigos have had, and even that whole Riot Girl queercore scene, it's pretty nuts. I mean, it's in a great way.
I mean, it's truly intense. It's fun, and it's also humbling to be the only guy on stage and not one person give a shit who, you know, about you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
everyone's focused on these other beautiful ladies, and which is totally fine and a great experience. But yeah, it's intense. I mean, the Indigo Girls fandom's pretty intense. I mean, I've seen a little bit of that just from having her on my record. Like they come to me, you know,
Yeah.
and they're like, can I get autographs? And it's cool, but it's interesting.
Which is really kind of a, you know, a beautiful thing of her to give you her time and talents on your record.
I mean,
Um,
totally. I'm, you know, there was no given that she would even want to participate, and I was truly humbled. And I mean, just I've said it before in interviews, but you know, the lessons I learned just about being a songwriter and treating it, not just treating it with respect, but it's like, you know, she treats it like a job. You know, she works at it. It's not, and I identify with that. There's nothing in my life that I do that, you know, I was not born with any, I'm not a prodigy. I was not born gifted. You know, anything I have accomplished is because I sat down and did a thing, you know, and like tried and figured out what the best version of me was. And, you know, and I see Amy do that. She works hard and to write good songs, and she does.
so, you know, you go through, all of us live through kind of the worst of COVID, knock on wood. Um, and you kind of come out the other end with a new perspective. And for the first time ever, I mean, it is you up front, the face of this record. You know, I can only relate to it, but when I play solo gigs, I feel rather naked without my band, because it's just, I write my music for the instrumentation of the band, and it was just me on a guitar and my voice. I feel naked and alone. But I would imagine coming out the other end with this record last fall, that it must feel somewhat like that, but also just you know, a beautiful thing that you finally get to see. I'm sure you had, you know, you were working with these songs for a while, and just what's that been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, it was even more extreme than that. Is that I burnt out doing TV commercials and quit music for 5 or 6 years. I basically sold everything. I stopped answering emails. I was done. You know,
So
I
what'd
had,
you do? So it's at like maybe 2016, 20.
yeah, 20. I had just gotten divorced, 2015-ish. I had started painting, messing around with painting. I decided I just wanted to paint, so you know, luckily with commercials, there's these things called residuals. And so
Sure, sure.
I had some money coming in, and I could kind of do a thing. And I started painting, and I went back to school, and I started taking classes, and I just threw myself into painting and like studying painting and everything I could learn about process and painting. And I did that. I opened a gallery in Brooklyn. I found this little store, and, you know, the rent was cheap, and that's still running today. But I had, you know, in my head, I sold a lot of my guitars. I kept a rig around because occasionally someone would reach out to buy a piece of music. And so I would, you know, sell a piece of music once every 6 months. But other than that, I was done. And then, you know, there were funny little things, like there's always, and if in some ways it allowed me to listen to music again, because sometimes when you do music for a living, get what you ask for, and the last thing you want to do is listen to music. Like half the musicians I know, we all listen to talk radio all the time. It's just like, you know, so having this period to step away from music as a job and just become a fan again, like
Mm-hmm.
the things I wanted to listen to while I was painting, it really gave me this time to kind of think about what I wanted, what, you know, here I am, you know, in my late 40s, like, what is my life? What do I want to do? What did that first period of my life mean, you know, in juxtaposition to what I'm doing now? And so things started to creep back in. You know, I've always kept a guitar around. I've always, you know, an idea would pop up and I would save it, or I had my books of ideas. And then there was this great TV show called Songtown that I started watching. And it's, you know, it's this goofy show about people come bringing in songwriters and trying to make a hit. And watching that kind of like reignited me in some ways where I was like, I can do that. Like, you know, and then sometimes there would be some like someone like, I don't know if you know Esther Dean, but she's this top line writer and she's just brilliant. And I would hear her work and think that I cannot do. But that kind of got the juices flowing. And then strangely, you know, that Casey Musgraves record Afterglow came out around that time.
Yeah. It was, I mean, her Golden Hour, right? And then also, didn't you kind of start digging back into some Waylon Jennings records?
Yeah, so I just started I started listening to things I wanted to listen to, and not things I thought I was supposed to listen to.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's part of a scene. There's like these things you're supposed to listen to because everybody's listening to, and I just was listening to things that made me feel good, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's funny, you know, that you kind of dove into Waylon. When I listen to your record, I get so stuck on voice. And what it reminds me of is Christofferson, in the way that, yeah, and I do this too vocally when I sing, is that you kind of keep this, you're very level with your voice, and in a very similar way that Christofferson does. And it just, when I was listening to the whole record, it reminded me a lot of his work, which, you know, I guess is high praise because, you know, he's a god. So
I don't know how to process that, but yeah, I'm not an easily excitable person. You know, it's very, what you hear is my personality, you know, I'm not going to overdo it, you know, I hope. But
well, I mean, you're not vocally, you're not Axl Rose, you know, you're not going to those ridiculous highs or those crazy lows that every once in a while he goes to.
No, I keep my, you know, again, I think the most important thing of being a songwriter is knowing, being honest with yourself and knowing your, and work within those. It's fine. You know, like if you can only sing in a 10-note range, then keep it in those 10 notes, unless you really are just trying to push the boundary and it's got a reason. And those are just things you learn over the years. Like, it's fine. You can write great, interesting melodies and tell the story without having to do a whole lot. You know, I mean, John Prine's an example of that, though he's lyrically, you know, next level.
Well, I mean, even you know, Johnny Cash to a degree is
totally
certainly falls into that. I mean, it's funny whenever I get real defensive about my my musical ability in our band and my voice and my range, I always lean on, there's, you know, plenty of great rock and roll singers that had terrible voices, but somehow they did really well. Like, look at Bob, you know, Bob Dylan and Tom Petty don't have great voices, but they're, you know, some of the greatest songwriters ever. So I can do this.
Totally. I mean, I lean on that same.
Well, I mean, don't you think at the end of the day, I mean, it's really about, if you know, sure, if you have like a Katy Perry voice, you know, one of these voices that can hit these amazing octaves and things like that. If you don't have that in your tool set, it's about storytelling and that authenticity, right? Because I mean, that's what I hear when I listen to your music is I feel this kind of this authenticity of you kind of getting these things off your chest, a real reflective kind of sense of storytelling. Is that, you think, I mean, does that seem accurate in the ballpark?
Yeah, I hope so. The only weapon I have in my arsenal as a musician is vulnerability and honesty. You know, that's the only thing. And my version of vulnerability and honesty is the only thing that sets me apart from anybody else out there that can wail, you know? So I know that if I am honest and vulnerable in what I'm writing, and not always, sometimes I just need to get some goofy stuff out, but
sure,
if I can find those spots and deliver those things, and my mantra for this record as I was making it is, the last one, is if it makes me feel uncomfortable, go that direction.
Yeah.
You know,
do you feel like lyrically, you know, it's pretty clear that your childhood was filled with a lot of pain. Did you try to a degree get that off your chest in some of these songs, or or did you kind of set that to the side and kind of focus on what your life is now and looking at your life today and maybe reflecting on, your children that you're raising, or was it something else, or all the above?
I mean, truthfully, it's a little bit of all of the above. I'm grateful in the sense that my family and I and everybody, we've came a long ways, and there's a lot of healing, and there's a lot of, but I do know that in some ways mining that pain, if you will, is productive, to go think about what those things were and how can I use that feeling of insecurity or, whatever that, those different situations, how can I use those to tell these stories that matter to me in an honest way? And that's what I try to do. Even songs I write that feel like breakup songs, I'm in the happiest relationship I've ever been in my life, but I still write breakup songs, and I'm not pining for my lost relationships. I'm just mining the memories and the pain of, and my part in those things. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, it's just, I think you have to, it's like being an actor in that sense, that you need to get in touch with those things, those moments of pain, for a lack of a better word, to deliver an honest performance. And that's really all I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Gregory Dwane, the record is a self-titled one. It is DWANE. There's no Y in there. It's DWANE.
Relatives for naming my father.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the Loadout. This has been really great, and loved hearing you tell your story. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. We'll talk soon.
Hey folks, if you made it this far, and judging by our numbers you haven't, thanks for listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. You can always find us at loadoutmusic.com and wherever you like to get your podcasts, like iTunes or SoundCloud. And of course, as always, thanks to Gaslight Studios for hosting us. Have a good one.